Hello, tough act to follow. Thanks for staying in the room. I'd probably be out in the hallway there meeting Mr. Poiliev, so I appreciate it. We're going to change speed a little bit here. I have some charts to show you since I am, as Sean mentioned, an economist. So we love our numbers. That's what I'm here to talk to you about today, if I can figure out how to work this thing. There we go. So you're probably wondering, why is this banker here to talk to you about union jobs, trades? That is because I am not really a banker. I don't do any deal work. I work with the newly established RBC Climate Action Institute. Our role is threefold: to do research, thought leadership work that informs and inspires conversations around net zero transition in Canada. That's what we'll talk about here today. We're also engaging with folks like Mr. Poiliev and the government, as well as provincial governments, labor leaders, to convene important conversations about what the solutions to climate change are. And then the last thing we're doing is we're facilitating action. The bank, of course, is responsible for managing its financed emissions, the emissions we cause to be created when we lend to a company. Those emissions are important to address, and they reach across the Canadian and global economy because that's what RBC does. It lends across the Canadian and global economy. And so we're going to work with our industry partners to help clients and communities apply the solutions we've talked about and we've researched. So that's why I'm here today, to tell you a little bit more about our research as relates the green jobs of the future and the challenge for Canada's built environment, homes and offices that we will need to transition between now and 2050. So Canada is amid a $2 trillion challenge, as Sean mentioned. We have 730 or so million tons of GHG emissions annually. We need to get to zero by 2050. That cuts across the economy, across sectors, across jobs, across people and the way we live, work, and play every single day. We think we can probably get about 75% of those emissions cut by 2050 with current technologies. That leaves 183 million tons or so, this isn't exact math, that we need from new technologies, innovations, behavioral changes, changes to the way we live, work, and play every single day to get to net zero. So that's a big challenge. How do we go forward to develop new technologies? How do we deploy the ones we have today? And how do we get people to change? Well, that's the big thing. And as we do that, there's going to be a heck of a lot of economic growth. And as the economy changes underneath our feet to support sustainability, that means green jobs are going to be the jobs of the future, full stop. So we've done some analysis on what the green jobs of the future look like. This chart is showing you new jobs added over 10 years by what we consider their sort of green job classification. The dark blue stuff is all the stuff that doesn't change. It looks the same. You're doing it like you always have. The light blue stuff is things that are transition affected by increasing the demand. The best example of this is electricians. They won't really have to do very much differently. They're still working with electricity, but there's going to be a heck of a lot more demand for electricians going forward. And then the green stuff, that light green bar at the top of pretty much every bar there, is the new workers with new skills, with changes in what they're doing, and they represent about a third of the new workers. And I'll draw your attention to the fourth to last bar there, the one that looks sort of like equally split between those three kinds of jobs. That's the trades. So they have a huge, huge interest in understanding how skills are changing as these new jobs are added. At the same time, we're facing what Mr. Poiliev just said was this challenge of housing and building new houses and housing Canadians in them. We're going to have 5.5 million new Canadians by 2035 if the government meets its immigration targets. That's a lot of new Canadians. We'll need 5.8 million new homes in Canada. That's about a 40% increase in the housing stock to house them and to address housing affordability challenges that Mr. Poiliev was also talking about. As we do that, we'll build 100 million new meters squared of commercial space, offices, retail, warehouses, to facilitate the economic activity that population expansion will bring. And if we do it the way we do it now, to current building codes, heating with natural gas, and expanding on greenfield land, it's going to add at least 18 million tons per year to that total of greenhouse gas emissions, sending us in exactly the opposite direction of the way we need to go. So that means in Canada's built environment, as with other sectors, we have to do some rethinking. We need to be careful about the emissions that that new building is going to engender over its life. On the left here, you see embodied carbon emissions. What the heck does that mean? That's all the emissions that come from building a thing, from the materials we use to build it, before anybody even steps foot in a finished building. Concrete, steel rebar, materials, glass used for the facade, that's a lot of emissions. 400 kilograms of CO2 per meter squared of building. You can see it's more almost than 2 decades of the emissions associated with heating the building. All the stuff on the right there, that's the cumulative sum over the life of the building of heating and cooling emissions and other operating. So that's also a lot of emissions. How do we work to get both those down? We have to be careful. 5.8 million new homes, all that stuff on the left is going to add up pretty quickly. And so we need to rethink both how we build and then how we heat and operate buildings to get there. And that's going to have, as you can see, consequences across various kinds of trades. It's not just folks that do concrete or glaziers working on glass for facades. It's also HVAC. It's also systems and carpenters and building things as well as the operating of the building. So that's very important. We see 2 key challenges for Canada's built sector. And in fact, one is more an opportunity than anything else. We've got all these new houses we're going to build. In some ways, they're going to be the easy part of the problem. They're easy to electrify. We can build them with things like air source heat pumps in mind. We can design communities with geothermal, district heating systems, and we can design them to address emissions other than those that I just talked about. Things from transportation, our energy system, or food systems that engender emissions across the life cycle of a Canadian. And we can use new materials as we build them that either cut the embodied carbon by avoiding concrete or finding new chemistries for concrete, or that store emissions associated that have been sucked from the atmosphere as we build it. The best example of this is a number of mass timber buildings being built right across the country. Those changes will let us lock up all that carbon stored in those trees for 100 years. That's a real opportunity we can't pass up. And then we get to the harder part of it all, if that doesn't sound hard enough, which is retrofitting 400,000 homes a year. For reference, we do about 100,000 now, and we don't even do them all the way to net zero. And we have to do 25 million square meters of commercial space each year between now and 2050. That's a massive undertaking. It's a tripling of the current retrofit rate. And often these things just don't make any financial or carbon sense at all. So why is that? Well, the costs for owners of these buildings are extremely high. On your left, or my left, your right, you'll see the stack up as relates just replacing mechanical systems, HVAC systems in homes and offices. The left bar, the green one, that's telling you what it costs with a carbon tax and heating with natural gas. The other bars are electric sources, resistance or heat pumps, and they cost more. In some cases, just a little bit more, like in a single family home with a carbon price, but in the case of a condo or an office, a heck of a lot more. So from an owner's perspective, it's going to be really hard to do that. We'll need to think about how we get there. On the left, you see the costs on a system basis for electricity build-out that we're going to need if we're going to electrify all these homes. And it's mostly these orange bars you want to look at, which are system reinforcements. That's all the replacement of all those wires running to every community in Canada. That's a significant share of investment we'll need to figure out how to pay. And it's not included in those costs on the right-hand side of the slide. And we have to do it extremely quickly. So this shows the commercial and institutional space broken down by when they need structural elements replaced. We can't miss the opportunity to replace a facade when it's leaking air, but at the same time, we're going to have a hard time doing it with the current labor shortage. So 2020s, almost all the commercial space we need to retrofit can take a new facade, can take a new system, can build structural elements in, added insulation, and those things will be challenging to mobilize in the current workforce. We're going to need a heck of a lot more workers to get that done. Over the next couple of decades, that starts to ease out because the green here shows buildings where that isn't the case, where it doesn't make any financial sense to replace facades just for carbon savings. So the problem solves itself a little bit over time as we need to retrofit newer buildings that don't quite need the same level of care and attention. But it's still a challenge in the very near term. And labor pools are already strained. We've heard that a lot today already. So this shows shortages and surpluses in labor related to retrofits over the provinces between basically now and 2030. You can see in a couple of cases, Quebec and BC notably, there's some surplus labor expected. Who knows if that will actually go that way. But in Alberta and Ontario, there's strong labor shortages coming. And in fact, those are the provinces where we're going to have to do the most retrofits because they're the most reliant on natural gas heat. So here's what it looks like when you add in those 400,000 retrofits. And you can see everybody has a labor shortage. It gets more challenging in the already challenging provinces, and in some of the easier provinces, like Quebec and BC, we do still have strong labor shortages over time. That means we need to start thinking about how we prepare a workforce for a 30-year retrofit challenge starting today. The map here is just showing you the relative challenge based on current employment in the province. You can see there's some differences over time and space, but we do need to think about how we reallocate labor across provinces for that. So what does that actually all add up to when you look at different occupations? Well, it's 115,000 new jobs from retrofits alone. That's every year between now and 2050. That's a big draw on the current labor force. And a lot of it comes from a couple of key trades: HVAC, electricians, and then of course contractors, glaziers, carpenters, the whole gamut. So there's a big draw here, and it is concentrated, but it's not that concentrated, as you can see. So how do we move forward facing down that challenge? Well, we have another long-standing challenge in apprenticeship signups. They've slowed. That's something we need to reverse. This is showing what we think, or what the government thinks, apprenticeships might look like over the next couple of years. That's nowhere near where they need to be if we have all of these labor shortages we need to address. How do we get there? Well, there's, as Minister Qualtrough noted, several groups of underutilized labor. We think immigration is a key source of that need. We understand Minister Fraser was here earlier. Immigrants were 20% of Canada's population in 2019 or 2018. They're only 9% of new apprentices. That's something that has to change. We can think through how we proactively recruit non-Canadians, new Canadians into these trades, but the fact of the matter is we need to build homes for immigrants and we need to immigrate home builders. That's non-negotiable. We also need to reduce stigma associated with trades work, especially for women. And there are some very promising signs in that regard. With respect to women's increasing women apprentices in the trades, we've seen strong growth in women apprentices in some of these key trades we're talking about here today: carpenters, HVAC, things like that. Overall, numbers are down. That's something we need to reverse, but in a targeted way, we're starting to see some improvement. Another key thing we need to think about is reaching to untapped labor pools in Indigenous communities. There was a pilot in 2018 that looked at changes to the apprenticeship program to digitize it, to bring it to Indigenous communities. That worked well. We need to refresh that thinking and bring more training to Indigenous communities to bring their economic opportunity to them and use that vastly growing, rapidly growing youth Indigenous community in this generational challenge. We also can't just focus on all these new workers we're going to need. This is the result of some analysis we did in 2021. It looks across the economy at where existing workers are facing skills challenges. The green shows those jobs with enhanced skills. And if you sum all of that up, you'll see trades, transport, and equipment, significant draw here on new skills in the existing labor force. If you add all that up, it's 3.1 million Canadians who will need to be retrained. How do we do that? How do we deliver it? Well, some Canadian companies are doing things differently. They're partnering with universities like Ballard Power and SFU, bringing together the opportunity to integrate workers right into the companies where they're going to work in the future. And in some cases, companies are responding by moving where they do their production. We spoke to folks at Samuel, Son & Company, a big steel company in Hamilton. They said they were unbolting machinery and moving it around North America to where labor pools were solid. That's a response from companies to labor shortages where they can't get the skills they need, but it's not one that we want them to be doing. We want those people to be in Canada. We want the production to be located in Canada. So how do we make sure that folks get the training they need on the job in the companies they're going to be working in? And the reason Ballard, as I mentioned, is doing that program with SFU is because they have proprietary technology. They don't want to share that with the university. They want to train people under NDAs in the factories where they're going to be building the fuel cells. So we're going to need to rethink how we do some of these trainings as we retrain 3.1 million Canadians. That said, how exactly those skills are shifting remains an open question. On the left, you see this sort of spidery diagram that shows over the last couple of years how skills have shifted and how they're expected to shift. This was before the pandemic, before everybody started talking about transition. And you can see what's really moving for carpenters, that's who's shown in this diagram here, the shift towards digital and technical work, more computer-based modeling, things like that. Well, we're going to have to do that, and it's only going to increase. Those folks at Samuelson and Company that are sort of moving the machines around, a big part of growth for the auto sector has been in additive manufacturing, lightweight products, and that's also an opportunity to sell into new markets like aerospace. And so as we think about the increases in technical work we need to do, we're going to need to think about new training. And then underlying this big shift in the economy is that the composition of economic activity is changing too. I talked a little while ago about mass timber buildings. Well, that requires less site labor, but it doesn't require less labor overall. It just shifts what kind of workers are involved in the building of a building. If we take cross-laminated glulam panels, there's going to be more employment in things like CNC machining to build those panels before they come to the job site. So we're going to need to be nimble as we adjust our behavior and as we adjust training to the workforce of the future. And so, as I said, work-integrated learning is going to be key, and some of these measures from the Conservative Party supporting sole proprietors are going to also be very important. So I'll leave you there, and I'll leave you with a bit of a plea, which is that we're hoping to work more on what the shift in skills actually looks like. And a big part of that is going to be feedback from all of you in this room on what you're seeing on the ground, how you're changing your approach to training, how you're changing your approach to hiring. That matters a great deal. And so I think my contact information should be available. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear how you're addressing skills changes in your workforces. And our door is open. My email inbox is open. We'd love to work together in the future. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.